Hey guys, so I got some requests for this diagnostic test that we started yesterday. Number two starts off with some like weird vocab that we don't really get into until we start doing exactly this, like reviewing for the test, and we start learning some weird jargon like composition and inheritance. You understand polymorphism. Hopefully, you understand now. There's two basic okay two relationships between classes. Classes can either have an is a relationship or a has a relationship. Meaning a class either like is an instance of another class, or it has an instance of another class. This is an example of the has a type of relationship because a library list has a book in it. In fact, it has a whole array of books in it. They're completely separate classes-ish, not completely independent classes. Independent classes would be like a car class and a lizard class, completely unrelated whatsoever. So they're definitely not independent. Nothing's inheriting anything. That would be an is a class. Or it is a relationship, excuse me. Something like car and SUV, where SUV inherits everything from car. Does that make sense? If SUV extends car, then an SUV is a car. So it inherits everything. Inheritance is a relationship. Another word for a more formal word for a has a relationship, although you see the words has a more often than you see this, is composition. Meaning that you have one inside of the other. The book class can be found inside of the library list class because the library list utilizes the book class. Polymorphism is definitely wrong. That is the mechanism used to, at runtime, figure out which version of a method is most appropriate. And array list doesn't make any sense. Clearly somebody was just trying to come up with a fifth possible answer. So I hope that clears up what composition is and what a is a and a has a relationship are. Okay, in number 3, we were given an enhanced for loop where we are going through a list of integer objects, each one of which will be nicknamed num while I'm looping through. And if whatever condition is met, I will just add the number 0 to my list of integers. So we have an enhanced for loop going through list that is going to be possibly adding stuff to the list that we're looping through. And here's the problem. We should not be doing that with an enhanced for loop just because of the way enhanced for loops work. You got to be careful with enhanced for loops because they will typically throw a concurrent modification exception. If you are trying to change the list while you're looping through it, you are changing it while you're going through it. You can't do that because it doesn't, the loop itself won't know to back up or move forward or do whatever it's supposed to be done because you changed the list. A for each loop or an enhanced for loop is set up at the very beginning to make sure it gets through the entire list in order without skipping anything. So for that reason, you're just not allowed to change the list while you're traversing it. So this is going to throw a concurrent modification exception. But just so you understand the rest of them, array index out of bounds, that means you are using an index that doesn't make sense with the array that you're using, which can't be the case here because we're not using an index. This is just some sort of array list, so we just keep adding stuff. We're not referencing an index, so we can't have an array index out of bounds error. Likewise, we can't have an index out of bounds error. That would be for like looping through. If you're looping through something and an index in the loop doesn't make any sense, you'd throw an index out of bounds error. But again, we're not using an index, so that one doesn't make any sense. A null pointer exception might be thrown if list hadn't been initialized before we started this for each loop, but that's unlikely to be our answer here. Illegal arguments are thrown when parameters in methods don't make sense, where they don't pass like the preconditions before the method is run. With for each loops, you just have to look out for concurrent modification exceptions. Do not ever try to change a list while you're looping through it with a for each loop. You can do it with a traditional for loop, as long as you are careful and you do whatever you need to do to edit the index of the loop so that everything works the way you want it to work. So you're allowed to do it with for loops, but not for each loops. Okay, a lot of these questions like number 4 are just going to be way too long for me to write up here. So I hope you have your book in front of you. We're asked to implement the code for the constructor of the card class. So we have a card class and we have a deck class. In the card class, that constructor is just supposed to, like any constructor, is supposed to initialize the instance fields. So if you can see, we have 2 instance fields, suit and value, and the constructor is going to be passed in a string and an integer, the card suit and the card value. Now card suit and card value, those are not the names of our instance fields, those are just generic variable names that are getting passed in. Suit and value are our instance fields, and those are the ones that need to take the value of these 2 guys. So for that reason, we're going to pick A. Suit and value are our 2 instance fields. Suit is going to take on the value of card suit, and value is going to take on the value of card value. The other way around doesn't make any sense. Card suit and card value are the things that were passed in. I don't want to give them value, I want to take the value from them. So the other way around doesn't make any sense. I don't want to make a new card in the card class. The constructor calling itself is going to, I don't know, break reality. Card equals new card, same thing. I'm not going to have the constructor call itself, and I certainly wouldn't, I just don't want to do any of this. This is all nonsense. These getters won't make any sense until I've actually given suit and value. So calling get suit and calling get value don't help me. So E doesn't make sense. The constructor just wants to initialize its instance fields. That's all. Okay, number 7 is a weird question. We have a loop that's easy enough to understand. I don't know what n is, but we're going to start at 0 and go up to, but not include n, and pay attention to this. You're going up by 2s. I don't know what the test is, and I don't know what action I am performing, but I'm asked in terms of Java, how many times, what's the maximum number of times this could possibly be run? Okay, well, let's just assume n is, let's make something up. Let's say n is 5. So I is going to be 0, and then it's going to be 2, and then it's going to be 4, and then it's going to be 6, which is too big, so we stop. So this loop will run 3 times, and that's when n equals 5. So 5 divided by 2 is 2. It's 2.5, which rounds down to 2, so that one doesn't make sense. If n is 5, 5 plus 1, 6 over 2 is 3, so that makes sense. N is 5, so that's not it. N minus 1 is 4, so that's not it. N minus 1, that's going to give us 2, so that ain't it. All right, well, there you go. Try n equals 5, and then is the only one that makes sense. Now, I think if you try an even one, let's just see this. And I starts at 0, and then it goes to 2, and then 4, and then notice it won't do 6 because it says I is less than n, so it doesn't actually run that one. This is also going to run 3 times. Be careful. If you started off with an even n, you're going to think that A could work. Hopefully you realize B also works, because let's see, obviously 6 divided by 2 is 3, which makes sense. 6 plus 1 is 7, divided by 2 is 3.5. That's actually 3, so that one still also makes sense. Hopefully you caught that. None of the other ones are going to make sense. 6 doesn't make sense, 5 doesn't make sense, and 2 doesn't make sense. So they are still gone. So make sure you check this with an even and an odd one, and you'll realize B is the only one that makes sense, no matter what N is. Okay, number 8 has way too much here to write, but let me just try to explain. So we have a method that needs to be written that searches through an array. I guess it's given a value, and it wants to find a value that's larger than the one that we're given. The method is to be written to search an array for a value that is larger than a given item and return its index. The problem specification does not indicate what should be returned if there are several such values in the array. So which of the following actions would be best? The method should be written, just in case you don't have it in front of you, here we go. Let's see, the method should be written on the assumption that there is only one value in the array that is larger than the given item. Don't ever work on assumptions, so get rid of A. The method should be written as to return the index of every occurrence of a large value. That doesn't make sense. You can't return more than one thing, so get rid of B. The specification should be modified to indicate what should be done if there is more than one index of larger values. There you go. There's your winner, because that's the only thing that makes sense. You have to go to your boss and ask them for more specific instructions. What should be done? Should it be the first occurrence, the last occurrence, some third option I can't come up with? You can't just make a decision on your own. Go to your boss and ask him what he wants you to do. But let's just move on and just look at D and E. The method should be written to output a message. No, the method is supposed to return the index of something. So don't go changing the behavior. We don't want to return a message. We want to return the index of something. Part E here, let's see, the method should be written to delete all subsequent larger items after a suitable index is returned. If that's not what our boss told us to do, we should not be editing the array. Okay, so C is the only one that makes sense. You need more specific directions. Okay, number 15 here, we're asked which of the following statements, 1, 2, and 3, about a bunch of 3 different classes is false. Well, point is a subclass of quadrilateral. Well, no, that's just, sorry, that is not correct. The point class is not a subclass of anything. It just says public class point, so it doesn't extend anything. It is just its own class. So yeah, point is a subclass of quadrilateral. That is false. So 1 is definitely false. Let's see, point is a subclass of, for the same reason, point isn't a subclass of anything. So 1 and 2 are definitely both false. Rectangle inherits the quadrilateral constructor. Now, rectangle is a subclass of quadrilateral, and it inherits everything from quadrilateral. However, you see that rectangle has its own constructor. Of course it does. You cannot inherit the constructor of your parent class. So you inherit everything from your superclass, but you don't ever inherit a constructor. Every class, every subclass requires its own constructor. Now you can call the superconstructor, and in fact, every constructor will implicitly call the default 0 parameter constructor of a superclass, only if no other explicit call is called, but you don't just inherit the constructor. If you're trying to make a rectangle, then you don't inherit the quadrilateral constructor. You don't. So all 3 of these are false, so our answer is going to be E here. But there is some other interesting stuff I just wanted to point out, because we talked about is a and has a relationships earlier in composition and inheritance. So I just wanted to point out where those pop up in this question here. So rectangle inherits, well, rectangle is a subclass of quadrilateral. So that's an example of an is a relationship or inheritance. Rectangle is going to inherit everything except the constructor from the quadrilateral class. A rectangle has an is a relationship with the quadrilateral class. The rectangle also has a relationship. If I pull this up again, in the rectangle class you have 2 private instance fields that are points. That means the rectangle class has points in it. It has instances of the point class in itself. So that's an example of a composition or a has a relationship. I hope that example kind of clears up the difference between has a, is a, inheritance, and composition. Anyway, there you go. E is your answer there. Okay, number 17 here, we have a new class that's going to be introduced here, or two more classes. We've got the parallelogram and the square class. And let's see, parallelogram is going to extend quadrilateral, and square is going to extend rectangle. Remember that rectangle was also already extending quadrilateral. So everything can be called a quadrilateral. We have a quad list that definitely contains rectangles, parallelograms, or square objects. And I'm running the right areas method, which gets passed in an array list of quadrilaterals called quad list. So let's see, we have an enhanced for loop that goes through the entire quad list, getting every quadrilateral, and then attempting to sys out area of, and then it's going to call quad.getLabels is a, and then quad.area. So it's going to attempt to get the labels of the quad and then print out the area of the quad. So here are our options. What's going to happen? Are we going to get the area of every quadrilateral printed out? I think so. That's definitely the point of the method, but let's just read the other ones and see if there are any errors that we didn't think about. The value of 0 is printed for every single element. Well, you might think that because if you go all the way back to the, sorry, this is super awkward. Go back to the quadrilateral class, you see that if you call dot area, you get 0. But while that's what a quadrilateral does, each of the more specific quadrilaterals also has its own dot area method. So polymorphism is going to kick in during runtime and run the appropriate version of area. So if everything was a quadrilateral, we would just get 0. But if the shapes were properly initialized as parallelograms or squares or whatever, then at runtime, the program is going to run the appropriate get area method and not just the quadrilateral area method. So B is wrong because polymorphism should take care of using the appropriate area method. A compile time error. I see no reason for there to be a compile time error. I think in C they specifically said there's no get labels method in the other subclasses. Well, no, there's not, but these things are quadrilaterals. That's what it says in the array list. It's an array list of quadrilaterals. If it was an array list of specifically squares, then no, squares don't have the get label method, but it's an array list of quadrilaterals, and there is a get label method available in the quadrilateral class. So all of the other shapes will definitely inherit that and will be able to call get labels while it's compiling. So C is wrong. D, we would get a null pointer exception if the array list wasn't initialized or created, but you'll notice we have a precondition here. Oops, excuse me. This precondition says clearly that quad list does contain stuff and it exists, so we don't have to worry about it not being something. We won't get a null pointer exception. The precondition takes care of that. A concurrent modification exception could typically be thrown, especially when you have a for each loop, which we do here, but we're not trying to change anything. So we're not concurrently modifying our list of quadrilaterals. So there's no way that's going to get thrown. So I definitely have a reason to get rid of all of these. I'm pretty sure the method is going to do exactly what we think it's designed to do, and it's going to just print out each of the quadrilaterals and its areas. Hope that helps. Okay, understandably on number 20, I got some questions because this is the first question you're seeing that deals with recursion. The only topic that we haven't gotten to yet together. Now, the interesting news is that the College Board made a decision a couple days ago stating that recursion is going to be taken off of the AP test. So you don't really need to understand this, although you should. You still should. I think that we can still work through the recursion problems in these practice tests and get the hang of it. Although, just know that you won't see any recursion on the AP test. Well, this is how it works. Recursion is what happens when you have a method calling itself. It's a fancy way of doing a loop. Like sometimes it's kind of an elegant way of looping through, or an easier way of looping through stuff. So I am going to call the what's it method with the number 347. All right, so I first get into what's it. The number is definitely bigger than 10. So I immediately now call what's it with 34. So don't go to the next line because you already called what's it, so you start it over again. Now I am going to have to finish the method eventually, but I just teleported to another version of what's it, so I can't run that line yet until I'm done teleporting and then I can come back, if that makes any sense at all. So I just started all over again with a third call to what's it. I guess a second call with 34. So 34 is bigger than 10. So looks like I'm calling what's it again now for a third time. So I'm going to send 3 to the what's it method. And again, I'm not going to sys anything out because this line of code just teleported me out to a whole new what's it method. So I start what's it all over again, this time with 3. N is not bigger than 10 this time. So I'm finally not going to call what's it over again, and I'm just going to do this. I'm going to sys out n mod 10. N being 3, so 3 mod 10 is 3. Now, this is where things get like Inception, and I start riding the wave back up. So now that this method is done, I go back up a level to where I had called what's it 34. Since that call is now complete, I can get to this sys out. So sys out 34 mod 10, which is 4. And then I ride it up to the next level again, where I had called what's it 347. And since now that call and the call inside of that call, everything is done, I'm back to this line of code and I can proceed to the next line and I will sys out 347 mod 10, which is 7. And that was my original call to what's it, so now I'm done. So this is what is going to get printed out, 347. E. Last thing I'm going to leave you with today, guys, is an update on a message from College Board. We heard a couple days ago that they are making some changes to the test this year. You can expect no multiple choice questions and a 45-minute free response test only to be taken at home, assumingly on a computer. Now, things could change. They're going to formalize things and get us more details on April 3rd. So as soon as I know more, I'm going to let you know more. But right now, we're told to expect a free response section only to be taken at home, and it is going to be a 45-minute test. I think they're going to make it 45 minutes so that you don't have enough time to cheat. Speaking of which, don't get too excited about an at-home test, because College Board has offered at-home tests before, so they know how to make their tests cheater-proof. Don't expect to be able to thumb through your book or your notes or run everything through Eclipse to make sure stuff works. You're not going to have enough time, and they're going to implement some other sort of security precautions. I don't know what they are, but I know that they've been doing this for years, so they know what they're doing. So don't get too excited. It's still going to be an AP test. They are also taken off some of the units. I think the last 3 units. There will not be 2D arrays. Oh, yeah, I didn't add that here. No 2D arrays. No 2D arrays, no inheritance, no polymorphism, and no recursion. Now, okay, you can get excited about all of that stuff. If you're struggling with any of that, none of it's going to be on the AP test. I still want you to understand all that, because we were able to get through everything here except for recursions. So I do want you to be solid on all this stuff, especially if you plan on moving on next year and studying this stuff in college. So we will still, I'm not going to take out questions that are in these topics, and we might never formally get to recursion, but I do want to discuss those when they pop up in the practice tests, and hopefully you can get the hang of them because they're fun. Anyway, that's all I know for right now. Like I said, I'm going to let you know more as soon as I know more. Your mission today is to just watch this video and shoot me any more follow-up questions if you have any, and we can work out any of the other problems one-on-one if you have more questions. Your assignment for tomorrow is probably going to be more of this test, so if you want to get started, you can go ahead and get started, but you don't need to until tomorrow. But that's all I got for you today, so have a nice day, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.